Hazardous wastes, including above-ground and below-ground storage tanks, are regulated through numerous laws and regulations. Though hazardous waste can be found anywhere, projects that have new right-of-way or easement acquisition are a particular concern based on the associated ground disturbance. MoDOT environmental staff are responsible for screening and evaluating the potential for hazardous waste or above-ground and below-ground storage tanks along a project corridor. Depending on the contamination at a site, the district may want to avoid unnecessary costs and risks associated with the project. The Missouri Petroleum Storage Tanks Insurance Fund, or PSTIF, provides the necessary pollution liability insurance to owners and operators who store petroleum in underground storage tanks, or USTs, and above-ground storage tanks, or ASTs. The purpose of the PSTIF is to ensure that there are available funds to clean up any leaks or spills that occur to a UST or AST. In addition, the PSTIF also provides funds for cleanup of tank sites where USTs or ASTs were decommissioned by December 31st, 1997, if the property meets certain criteria. The most common hazardous waste site MoDOT acquires is an active or abandoned service station. Many of these sites have insurance policies with the PSTIF. If the site meets certain criteria, it may be eligible to receive benefits from the PSTIF. The environmental specialist will coordinate with the PSTIF to determine eligibility of the site and the potential for MoDOT to be reimbursed if cleanup is required. The Request for Environmental Services provides the Design Division staff the necessary information to obtain approvals and clearances from the Federal Highway Administration and the resource agencies, ensuring project compliance with state and federal regulations, thus preventing project delays. The district will submit an RES at each project development milestone. These project milestones include the location and conceptual stage, preliminary plans stage, right-of-way plans stage, if required, and the final design plan stage. The district initiates this process by submitting an RES to the Design Division for every project. During the location conceptual plan stage, including preparation of NEPA documents, location studies, the environmental specialist evaluates proposed corridors for hazardous and solid waste sites regulated or listed using MDNR's eStart database. The environmental specialist also provides hazardous waste information for MoDOT prepared NEPA documents and reviews consultant prepared NEPA documents. Although site investigations are not recommended at this stage unless the district is confident that impacts are unavoidable or needs to justify an alternative, the environmental specialist can recommend whether a site should be avoided if enough information is available. At the preliminary plan stage, the environmental specialist will re-evaluate the proposed corridor if the extent of the project has been updated. The environmental specialist may recommend conducting a site investigation for any impacts identified at this stage. This might comprise a visual site inspection and/or a site investigation that includes sampling to determine whether there is contamination that could impact the project. This is called a Phase 1 Environmental Site Assessment. The environmental specialist can coordinate the investigation of a site either through MoDOT's Material Lab or with one of MoDOT's hourly rate consultants if additional work is needed. In some circumstances, the environmental specialist will coordinate with the Environmental Protection Agency and MDNR to determine potential liability and regulatory requirements. At the preliminary plan stage, the environmental specialist can recommend whether a site should be avoided and, if not, can provide the district with recommendations for cleanup and, if requested, potential cleanup costs. At the right-of-way plan stage, the environmental specialist will again re-evaluate the proposed corridor if the extent of the project has changed since the last submittal. Since the right-of-way limits are more definite at this stage, the known impacts are more clearly defined. The environmental specialist will coordinate with the district on actions that will be necessary to mitigate an acquired hazardous and/or solid waste site or contaminated media that may be encountered during construction. If a site investigation has not been conducted prior to right-of-way stage, the environmental specialist could recommend that a site investigation be conducted to determine the extent of contamination so that quantities can be estimated. If a site to be acquired is an active or abandoned service station and cleanup is required, the environmental specialist will coordinate with PSTIF on the site's eligibility to receive PSTIF benefits, unless this was already addressed during the preliminary plan stage. Sites that participate in PSTIF will have a policy that insures the owner in the event a release occurs at the site. At the time of such a release, a claim is established for reimbursement and remains active as long as remediation is necessary. In the past, MoDOT was able to have the policy and claim transferred to MoDOT upon the change in ownership. However, because of recent changes in the PSTIF regulations, an active policy held by the owner can no longer be transferred to the purchaser of the property. Only the claim, if established, can be transferred. Therefore, if a claim has not already been established on a parcel to be acquired by MoDOT, a site investigation should be conducted prior to transfer of ownership. Failure to establish a claim prior to property transfer will result in MoDOT not receiving reimbursement on any cleanup of the property. If a claim has already been established, the appropriate paperwork should be submitted to PSTIF to transfer the claim to MoDOT when MoDOT right-of-way acquires the parcel. The environmental specialist will work with the project manager and right-of-way to transfer the claim. At the final plan stage, the environmental specialist will conduct a final evaluation of the proposed corridor for hazardous and solid waste sites regulated or listed. The environmental specialist coordinates with the district on the actions that will be necessary to mitigate an acquired hazardous waste site or contaminated media that may be encountered during construction. The environmental specialist will coordinate with the district on any standard specifications, JSPs, job special provisions, and bid items needed for the project to be included in the contract. Most projects are covered in Standard Specifications Section 202, Removal of Roadways and Buildings. The project manager is responsible for ensuring that JSPs and bid items are included in contracts. Prior to the project being let and dependent upon the type of hazardous or solid waste site acquired, the following items will need to be completed. 1. Before USTs are removed, the environmental specialist will need to submit a registration and closure notice. Above-ground storage tank sites do not require registration and closure notices. 2. The environmental specialist will work with project manager and/or right-of-way to confirm that the PSTIF claim, if applicable, has been transferred following property transfer. 3. The environmental specialist will submit UST closure project estimate to insurance fund if information is available. Contractor costs cannot be submitted until the contract is awarded. 4. The environmental specialist will coordinate with MDNR or other agencies on any additional requirements or notifications required. The MDNR eStart Mapper is a free public mapping tool provided by MDNR that can be used to identify known hazardous waste sites in Missouri. The eStart Mapper contains locations and details regarding known underground storage tanks, hazardous waste sites, cleanup sites, and restricted use areas. The eStart Mapper can be found at the link provided or by searching MDNR eStart Mapper. Click on View Map to get started. The eStart Mapper depicts the spatial location of hazardous waste sites, cleanup sites, and regulated petroleum tank facilities. To determine if any known hazardous waste sites are present near a project, zoom into the project area and select All on the legend at the left-hand side of the screen. To learn more about a known hazardous waste site, click the symbol to open a new page. The new page will contain the name, address, owner, and summary of a known hazardous waste site. MoDOT environmental staff are responsible for determining if hazardous waste sites exist within its project and if they are a concern. The district should note any known issues related to hazardous or solid waste in the RES Known Concerns section. Additional hazardous waste requirements exist for projects involving the renovation or demolition of structures. Most commonly, these requirements pertain to bridge rehabilitation and replacement projects. All projects involving the demolition and renovation of structures require an asbestos inspection and lead-based paint inspection. These inspections must be completed by qualified individuals who have valid, up-to-date Missouri DNR and Missouri DHSS certifications. All projects involving the demolition of structures will require notification to MDNR prior to demolition, even if no asbestos is present. If asbestos is documented, MoDOT environmental staff will provide information on next steps and determine if the asbestos levels are above thresholds that would require abatement activities. If lead-based paint is documented on a structure that will be affected, the district should keep in mind that these materials cannot be used as clean fill. Documentation of the asbestos and lead-based paint inspections, as well as reports and lab results, should be uploaded to the RES for review by MoDOT environmental staff.